Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this point in history where society is flourishing more than it ever has before. In this video, we're going to be reacting to Oliver Anthony and Jordan Peterson. Here's what we've done. You know, this is really a beautiful moment for the channel. We've made several reaction videos to Jordan Peterson. People seem to love the content. We've made one reaction to Oliver Anthony in a song. My reaction to Oliver, whose name is actually Christopher, did swimmingly well. It has about a 68% dislike rate, which is like really good stuff if you know your YouTube metrics. Pause for a moment. There's something that we have to discuss that is absolutely unacceptable, and that is YouTube dislikes. I have a count of how many dislikes I have on that video in my YouTube analytics, and I'll put that up on the screen right now. There's also the Chrome extension, which is supposed to tell you how many YouTube dislikes there are in a video, and that one has a different number. It says that there are 4.6K dislikes, whereas my backend says that there's only over 2,000 dislikes. So which one is it? Someone is inflating their numbers here. We need to get to the bottom of this. The people need to know the truth. People just loved the content. They were like, this person is speaking the truth. He knows what he's talking about. He also has a red beard. He sort of looks like a leprechaun. I think a lot of people were interested in seeing me on a Lucky Charms box. There was a lot of commentary on it. Anyway, today we're going to be combining these concepts of Oliver Anthony and Jordan Peterson, witnessing this amazing conversation that he had a couple of days ago, art, commerce, and the religious. Let's get into it.
Hello, everyone watching and listening.
Ooh.
Today, I'm speaking with musician Chris Lunsford, better known by his stage name, Oliver Anthony. We discuss the balance between vision and efficiency in artistic and commercial endeavors, why Chris's hit song, Men North of Richmond, has resonated so broadly and so quickly, the way honest expression through music can combat demoralization, how politics have become confused with the sacred, and what we can do to restore each to their proper order. Looking very much forward to it. I had a roommate from southern Alberta in college in Montreal. I wasn't really a country and western fan at that point. He really liked Hank Williams, and I started listening to Hank Williams, and I thought, oh my God, man, this is great. And when I moved to Boston, I started collecting old vinyl records. Of course, I had records when I was a kid. Yeah. But in the 90s in Boston, you could pick up vinyl for like $3 for $1. You know, it was dirt cheap. So I used to go into the record stores and pick up any old weird-looking album, usually from the 50s, 40s through the 60s. And I built a big collection of country and western music. And then I made a couple of CDs I called Western Blues and was giving those out for Christmas presents. And I actually have a Spotify playlist that's 29 hours long now with 600 songs on it that I've collected for 40 years. My wife and I listen to it a lot in the car. It's real good driving music, you know, and I'm going to just list some of the characters that I listen to. You're familiar with all these guys, but a lot of people watching and listening won't be, and they should be.
Just so that this doesn't get too dry, I've decided to throw a few games for the audience in here. This game's called Why Am I Laughing Right Now? Is it A, I don't really like country music? Is it B, I sometimes laugh uncontrollably at things that aren't funny at all? Or is it C, Jordan Peterson, to my perception at least, seems like he's trying awfully hard to appeal to a country audience while he's talking to someone who became popular by releasing a country song, while that very person sitting in front of him is sort of just coyly smiling at him. If you think you have an answer, comment down below.
There's Hank Williams, of course. Bill Monroe and his Kentucky Boys. Coulter Wall's a new guy from Saskatchewan.
Oh, yeah.
He's a great he's great. My son played one of his songs to open my lectures for 11 shows this year. That was really fun. I'm not a Johnny-come-lately to the kind of music that you've been playing, and so...
That's very in like with my listening. So I love a lot of the older music and older blues like Delta blues and that type of thing. But yeah, that's I wouldn't have guessed that about you. So that's good to know. Yeah, it's
Wait, you wouldn't have guessed that about Jordan Peterson? That he listens to country music? What possibly could you be judging Jordan Peterson on that would indicate that he doesn't listen to country music? I just couldn't possibly ascertain a reason for that.
About a quarter of this Spotify playlist is Delta blues too, because there's a great overlap, right, between that Delta blues tradition and the kind of music that you're interested in.
But no, there's a good lesson here, which is, you can't just judge people by their appearance. There are certain things that you can at least make a reasonable interpretation about when you look at someone, but it's not completely going to define their character. And there are things where you are going to be surprised, even if you might have a very strong initial impression of someone. This is a perfect example of that. I personally, as you might have guessed as well, don't listen to a lot of country music. And as someone pointed out in the comment section of my initial reaction video, it's not actually country music, it's Appalachian folk music. So I was glad that that distinction was made. For someone who doesn't really listen to country music like myself, it makes sense that I would confuse different types of music in these different sets of subgenres, let's say. Oh, great. It looks like this reaction video we are going to be dealing with squawking birds in the background. That should be fun. I, being the pretentious music listener that I am, enjoy classical music. I enjoy, if we're going to delve into more modern stuff, I'm a fan of jazz. Ella Fitzgerald, put on some of that. Pink Floyd, this is who I am. And there's nobody who can shame me for being the pretentious music listener that I am. Music is one of those funny things because we all have our different tastes, and there's really no way to tell someone like, how could you not like that music? Or this music is so much better than that music. It's sort of ridiculous. Everybody has their taste in music, and a lot of it is massively influenced by the culture in which you grew up.
Something you may look at adding to your playlist or looking up that I think you'd find interesting is, I don't know who the group is in the video, but if you go on YouTube, it's called Carpathian Folk Music. And it's usually the first video to pull up under Carpathian Folk Music. And it's maybe, I want to say it's about 45 minutes long. And it goes... Oh, okay. And it plays out almost like a symphony. Like it starts in sort of one element, and then it has its ups and downs. And I've listened to that thing 200 times. It's like sitting out in the woods listening to that. It takes you on a ride almost the way like Beethoven would, but it reminds me kind of almost a lot of the older country and blues. It's a very weird element, but it's got a lot of the sort of bluegrass elements to it, fiddle and upright bass and stuff like that. You ought to check it out, the Carpathian Folk Music. I think you'd like that.
I will 100% check that out. Yeah, one of the things that's really quite a mystery about music, and I can't quite figure it out, is I like classical music. I listen to a lot of music in the car. Classical music's hard to listen to in a car because it's got such an immense dynamic range. But, classical music is obviously extremely sophisticated and complex and brilliant and reaches up into the stratosphere of genius. But there's dead simple music that manages exactly the same thing. I mean, Johnny Cash is a great example of that because, in the Ken Burns documentary, you find out when Johnny Cash first started, his musicians could barely play at all.
There's a balance to be recognized between music that is sophisticated and can be appreciated for its genius and its complexity, but might not have the same element of relatability. I think that's a real issue that classical music has had in appealing to the younger generations. It's that it just doesn't appeal in a relatable way to where we are at this time. You think about the modern context, you think about the kind of nihilism that we have, you think about all of these different aspects of this culture that make it unique from a culture, let's say 250 years ago. And then you put on some Mozart, it's like, it just doesn't relate in any way. It's sort of the beautiful thing about music, that regardless of the time period, regardless of the culture, there is a way through this linguistic combination of sounds and pitches and rhythms to connect with all different kinds of humans. I know it's probably weird to hear someone talk about music in that way, but I'm a weird dude. You're going to have to get used to it.
They knew like 3 chords. Of course, the Sex Pistols were like that too. And weirdly enough, and I don't get this exactly, is that there's one of the hallmarks of musical genius is authenticity and genuineness, right? So you can take a really simple melody and you can do something stunningly brilliant with it. Hank Williams is great at that. And it gives it a depth that's timeless, right? It doesn't it doesn't age, well, which is what timeless means, of course. But
I love
it has
that.
to be.
The amount of situations I've gotten to just like that, where I've said a word and then I describe exactly what the word means. Oh man. When you start studying music, you understand how a scale is structured. You understand how different chords are arranged within a single key. You understand how certain sequences of chords go together to create these sorts of chord progressions. And a lot of modern music based on these chord progressions is unbelievably simple. If you have the more pretentious music listening point of view, there's a tendency to scoff at most new forms of music because it is generally just 4 chords.
I wanna be forever young. I won't hesitate no more, no more.
But Peterson's point there is true. It is amazing what you can do with a simple melody. Even for something that has a little bit more complexity. I think Pink Floyd is a perfect example of this. Their music has so many layers to it. But there are these underlying catchy melodies that carry the whole song. That's what really captures the essence of relatability. But then you have to make sure that your harmony doesn't create so much complexity underneath the underlying melody that you lose that relatability. It's a very delicate balance, and this is why becoming a famous musician, a popular musician, is so double-edged. If you're trying to optimize for popularity, you might lose the authentic essence of the music, and so you end up making these songs that are hits, but they don't really represent the best of your musical offerings. And being an artist ultimately sounds like a miserable life in some sense, because you're never truly appreciated for what you want to be appreciated for.
And it has to be something like that genuineness, and it must be something like that that sparked the imagination of people around your song, right? Because when I was listening to it, I listened to it a couple of times this morning just to refamiliarize myself with it before we talked, and you have a genuineness of voice that has obviously struck a chord. And so, well, I'm curious about that.
Unintended.
First of all, I'm really curious about how you're doing, because you've been like the center of a media firestorm here in the last couple of weeks, and that must be shocking to you. What's that been like, and why do you think your song, what is it about your song that you think you did right that contributed to its going viral?
So I have taken time to try to understand that myself. The song skyrocketed in a way that there's been accusations that it was propped up, almost that I'm an industry plant, because it was like we posted the song on we recorded it on a Saturday. I think he uploaded it on Tuesday. And by Thursday, man, we were on a roller coaster ride. Like, it was already apparent that things were heading in a direction that nothing else on his channel had done previously, Radio WV. And yeah, I mean, I guess to answer the first part of your question, how I'm doing, I'm surprisingly very calm. Like, I've been entertained the last couple weeks. I've been given sort of an unfair advantage of how the internet works and how narratives are spread in certain directions to, people form opinions about things. Like, for example, me playing the Super Bowl, I've gotten a lot of comments and messages saying that I'm a sellout, that I've decided to sing at the Super Bowl. But that was just an internet meme that someone created on Facebook. Like, for example, the one that popped up yesterday was that Oliver Anthony stuck at Burning Man, and people were sending me stuff telling me how terrible it was that I'm at this, like, Burning Man's this satanic ritual place and you shouldn't be there. And it, like, so I uploaded a video of me hanging out with my goats in the woods. Like, yeah, man, Burning Man, it really, it's terrible being stuck at Burning Man. But, so I don't know. I try not to take myself so seriously, and I've tried not to take this situation so seriously. It's just, I'm blessed for the opportunity to be here. I mean, even just being able to have a conversation with you is surreal. Meeting Joe Rogan was surreal. Just the artists that I've looked up to, like Jamie Johnson and Shooter Jennings, and it's just so weird that they're a phone call away now. So I'm doing well. Like, as I'm sure you know, like the last couple of years haven't been so great for me anyway, as far as my own perception on life. And so this is exciting to have a new opportunity to dive into. It's really what I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've just been so terrified of the idea of doing it, but here I am. Like there's no going back now, I guess. So
It's a pretty overwhelming experience, being someone who I can tell is not used to having a spotlight shown on him. Probably appreciates his own privacy, and now he has anything but privacy. I think part of what people really like about Oliver Anthony as a character at this point is that it doesn't seem as if he tried to grab the spotlight. Like, here's this very humble, down-to-earth dude singing about things that generally people are thinking about. And yeah, there's some production value behind it. That's part of the reason why I think it was able to achieve this viral status. But it wasn't so flashy and in your face. To have someone like this from a relatable neck of the woods, speaking some truth, down-to-earth guy, what a nice thing to see. Because, I think there's a deep hunger for meaningful art right now, because so much of the mainstream art has become polluted. There's this vacuum for rich authenticity that is totally lacking. And it's really hard to achieve this status because we built these algorithms where you can just broadcast a message whenever you want and anybody can do it. We've optimized for a very specific type of voice. Good people like Oliver will just blend into the background, completely satisfied with a happy life. The reception he's getting makes a lot of sense in a time like this.
music is important to me individually. Like these songs that I wrote for me. And inadvertently, it has helped a lot of other people, like not just Richmond North of Richmond, but I've Got to Get Sober. Like that's one that I just recorded on my Android phone. And if you look through the comments and emails I've gotten, I had a gentleman the other day at Moyock. We played at a farm market, and he told me that his brother had committed suicide. He had been struggling with drugs for years. This is like a big, gruff guy, like a guy that looked like he could kill me with 2 fingers. And we hugged each other, and as he cried and told me this, like that's what's important to me, is like people are just so desperate to restore some element of humanity back in our life that we've somehow lost. I don't want to make this into some enterprise where everything's about beating the algorithm and being at the top of the charts and posting in social media at just the right time to capture the most audience. Like that there's plenty of people who are out playing that game, and they're good at it. And I'd like for them to continue to do that. I just want to feel like I have the freedom to do whatever I find it is necessary in that moment of time to impact people the way I have so far with the music that I've produced. I have something like 21,000 emails right now in my Gmail. I've got 2,500 unread messages on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and they're not just people telling me, good music, dude, keep it up. No, it's paragraphs of stories of like people having to work 2 jobs because they lost their business during COVID, and their kid committed suicide. And it's just wretched stuff that it is the full transparent narrative of what a lot of us already see on the surface level of what's happened the last few years. And yeah, so I don't know what I want my music to turn into. It may manifest itself into some form of a nonprofit or a ministry more than just me going out. I don't want to just go yell all my songs in a stadium every weekend for the rest of my life. I want this to turn into something that's more meaningful than that, if that makes any sense. So,
well, there's a bunch of things you said there. When I started to blow up and started working in a much more broad public manner, one of the things that was really hard on me was the kind of emails that you're describing. I'm not complaining about this. I'm just pointing it out. I'd done a lot of clinical work, and I'd seen a fair bit of misery in my clinical practice. I mean, that's an understatement. But, it was limited at most to a couple of dozen people. And then all of a sudden I was doing lectures for thousands of people and meeting thousands of people, and then hearing the kind of stories that you're hearing from hundreds or thousands of people. And, you talked about dehumanization and desperation, and it's really quite overwhelming to start to see that in that heartfelt sense you described. That big guy was giving you a hug and breaking into tears. I mean, you meet a couple of hundred people like that in a week who do the same thing, and I found that extremely, extremely difficult, because I didn't really understand how widespread that demoralization and desperation was, and to see that on a large scale was really heart-stopping. So that's dangerous.
And to add to the point, it exists within the music industry. Like, they say never meet your heroes, but I've gotten to meet quite a few of my heroes the last couple of weeks, and they have ridden the roller coaster of signing a big deal and playing shows and being in those contracts and in that algorithm. And they are, I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure there's people that love to go out and tour and do it, but like a lot of my heroes in music that I've talked to are not happy doing what they do. Like, they're not happy having to go out. And so they've told me.
Let me tell you what our experience. Yeah. Well, so my wife and I have been touring now for 4 years, and I'll tell you how we've managed it if you're interested. First of all, it's a real privilege, right, to be able to go out there and speak in front of thousands of people, and it's been a real adventure to go all over the world. Now, we have allied ourselves with top-rate people, and that's unbelievably helpful. So I've got a personal staff that handles security and logistics, and they take care of all the travel details, flights, hotels, getting me to the venue, Tammy and I to the venue. That's 100% off my plate. And we had a rule that we learned while touring, which was that if you have anyone with you that causes any trouble at all, that they don't immediately fix. So if they're troubled, they have to leave. You have to have people along who are like 100% zero trouble, because it's a lot of work to move from city to city every day and to be there for thousands of people, and you can't have unnecessary trouble. And then you have to figure out how to time it so that it doesn't wear you to a frazzle. You can die from an overdose of great opportunities, as you're definitely going to find out, and maybe already have. And so you have to figure out for yourself how you can take enough time so that you have that opportunity to do your creative work and not to exhaust yourself. And, that takes a certain amount of testing to see where that balance is. I travel with my wife. That really helps. We often travel with some friends or some family. The same rules apply. We won't travel with people that cause any trouble, but it's nice to have people along, because that keeps you, you get to know them better. It's a good adventure for them, and that keeps you together. I mean, it's possible to do this in a way that's like hyper enjoyable, and so that you get an opportunity to play for many people. But, it's a demanding enterprise, and you have to 100% make sure that you're surrounded by people who take what can be taken off your plate and that you can seriously trust. And then it can be an insane adventure.
Yeah. I'm excited for the opportunity to travel. Yeah. Like we've had, it's, as you're aware, this, like just the initial song broke in so many countries. Like, I've gotten an outreach. It was a shame that I couldn't travel abroad yet. I don't have a passport, but like I just got a message last night from a girl in Rome saying that, she and her boyfriend have been riding around all night listening to my music, and Ireland and Scotland. Like I do intend to travel. I just want to do it in a way that is more meaningful than just showing up in an amphitheater and shouting some lyrics at people and then everybody gets drunk and goes home. Like I'm sure there's a way I can conceptualize this to have more impact, because that's the importance of the song to begin.
There are certain people who wish they could simply duplicate themselves in an infinite way. Give one-on-one time with everybody. Part of what an artistic enterprise allows for is you're able to broadcast a message to many, many people. And that can be quite intimate. But I think there are certain musicians, and I think Chris is definitely an example of one of them, who just wishes he could have that intimate level of engagement and impact with every single person that he's performing to. It's unfortunate because we're limited in what we can do. And when you have as big of a heart as someone like Chris, you care about more and more people, and you hear all these stories, and it fills you up with this overwhelming sense of emotion, and you want to make the largest impact that you can, and you don't want the message of your impact to be diluted by all of these corrupt capitalistic forces. And I can imagine how overwhelming that is.
To begin with, is the impact it had. It somehow broke beyond the political front that has like almost encapsulated every part of our society today, not just in North America, but really globally. Like, the message resonated with people in all types of different cultures and countries. It's like, this phenomenon of politics sort of almost parasitically capturing the way we think about everything. That's a global thing. That's not just a North American thing at this point. And it's happening very quick.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So two things on that. Well, okay. First of all, One of the things that's happened, I think, is that the sacred has collapsed into the profane. And so the political has now become sacred. You have to have a space for things that are sacred so they stay out of the political. And everything has become too touchy to talk about because everything political has become religious. And that's really not a good thing. It's part of the reason that we need that a religious foundation isn't optional. I know you talked about that a little bit with Rogan.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that's interesting, you said you don't want to go just to a stadium and shout out lyrics and let everybody get drunk and go home. And, one of the things I've also seen that's unfortunate is that many of the artists I've talked to, and these were often people who had stellar, like, international careers, they're afraid, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case with you, but I'd like to talk about it with you. They're afraid that their mere art isn't good enough given the importance, let's say, of all the political and maybe religious upheaval there is in the world. But, I actually don't think that's true. I don't think, like, I've gone to a lot of concerts and I've watched the kind of quasi-religious nature of a great concert. And I actually don't think there's anything more important that an artist can do than, in your situation, for example, is to give the best damn concert you possibly can, and I can see you're torn between that to some degree, because you say, well, you don't want to go and shout out a bunch of lyrics so that people can get drunk and go home. But then that what you've done has spoken to many people very deeply all around the world, and that what you've done was a genuine expression of what you really believe to be true. And I would say that if you go to a concert and what you do is you really sing what you believe to be true, there actually is no better service that you can possibly do to people, no matter what it is that you're doing. Like, I don't think there is anything except for what's truly...
Oliver's hesitation is that the presence of him being on that stage in front of this large audience is inherently not an intimate experience. Now, Jordan talks about in his lectures how when he speaks to audiences, he tries to focus on one person and to see how that person is engaging with him, and then he'll shift over to another person to try to imitate that essence of intimacy that we have within one-on-one interactions. But I really do think that is what Oliver is afraid of. Sometimes it's in environments where there are more people that we feel are most alone.
Truly religious, I don't think there is anything that supersedes genuine art, not in terms of potency and truth. And I think you're seeing that because of what happened in relationship to your song. And I think that's also partly because of that other point you made, which is, and the same with the song about sobriety, is you're actually writing your songs. I think Hank Williams did this, and Johnny Cash too, unbelievably effectively. The genuine songwriters, they're not writing to max out the algorithm, and they don't have contempt for the audience. That's not what I mean. But they're not doing it for their own fame. They're doing it to express something approximating the truth in the way that they see fit. With you, that's obviously going to be musical. So one of the things I would say is, don't be thinking there's any higher purpose you can serve than the genuineness that you bring to your art, man. Good musicians are, I think people die without good music. You know, it's so important. We have no idea how important it is.
Yeah,
how
I agree.
key it is to humans.
It's obvious to me that music is, every culture that we know of, whether they're, music is something that manifests itself in any society. And the more that people suffer, the more they lean on music, you know? Some of the best music's been written in the worst of times. So I definitely agree. Like there's an element of healing to it. And one thing that I've noticed about the music industry, just now that I'm in the business, you know, one of the things I've noticed is that we prioritize, as with a lot of things in art now, like we prioritize through the system of the music industry, we prioritize what can make the most money and not necessarily what can resonate with the most people or what's the most genuine and authentic. And so like in country music, now I loved 90s country music as a kid. I remember riding with my parents and my grandpa and listening to, you know, the Alan Jacksons and George Straits and Bubba Shot the Jukebox. And like, those are just fun, like just good songs. But somewhere country music, and I think music in general, has really lost a connection with people because it's become too commercialized and not enough about. And so that's kind of like, yeah, so I've turned down a lot of offers.
Oh man. You know, there seems to be a conflict within the conversation here. Jordan's perspective is that you now have this opportunity to impact as many people as possible. And that requires attending these large concerts. And in some ways, I think it makes sense that Jordan would be providing this advice for Oliver to pursue a more public music career in which he's doing these larger scale events, because in some sense it's what Jordan chose. So he's sort of justifying his own decision when he's instructing Oliver to take a similar path. But you know, people are different. We're going to have our different paths. And if I'm gathering a bit more accurate of an analysis of Oliver's priorities or Chris's priorities in this instance, I think there's going to be a little bit more balance in that. I think there's going to be a concert component where you're able to address many people at once. I think there's also going to be a component where you almost have this private musical practice where you're able to address people individually, or you're able to address families individually. And I mean, I'll throw out the term music therapy, although, you know, in the conservative world, therapy tends to get a bit of a bad rap these days. But nonetheless, music is therapeutic. Whether it's in a large audience setting or it's in a very personal setting, this can have a meaningful connection with people. But just to be able to craft a relationship with a listener that is more personal, I think perhaps opening up a practice where people can come and they can listen to you personally, and you get to choose how much you want to charge for that. And maybe it's not going to be the kind of thing that maximizes your impact, but maybe it's going to make you feel better as an artist that you're making the kind of impact that you want to make. And I do think there's going to be a balance between both of those. After all, in my experience, there is generally some wisdom in balance, but that's for Chris to figure out. So let's continue.
But I guess the reason why I want to stay on my own path is that I'd like to inspire other musicians to do the same thing. You know, like the story of kind of how all this came about is just, I mean, most of the music's from my Android phone that I, you know, just recorded, put it on YouTube. I ripped the WAV file, uploaded it. There's a service called DistroKid you can use. You pay like a nominal fee annually. They don't take any of the money, and it automatically puts it on all the platforms for you: Spotify, Pandora, Apple, YouTube Music. Like, I would like to see more people do what it is I did. Like, I'd like, if anything, I'd like it to inspire other artists to not worry about going through a record label or worry about trying to find a big booking agency, but focus more on creating whatever it is you feel compelled to create and get it out there, and not worry about everything else. Because obviously that's what we're so desperate. I mean, like even just the phenomenon with podcasts in the last 5 years, like the fact that people can sit here and listen to us talk for an hour and a half so intently. And like, that's been me. I listen to podcasts all day long. people are just at this point desperate for authenticity and desperate to connect with other human beings on a level that we haven't been able to connect on very well in the last 10 years because of technology and politics and government and just sort of this weird separation that's been put between us. And COVID certainly accelerated that to a whole new light. Like it's a very weird world we live in today. And so, yeah, that's kind of my thought process, I guess, to kind of wrap up that on me in my future. It's more about trying to create a new way of thinking with music. And really it's an old way of thinking, but it's just bringing it into our time, you know?
Okay, so that's very interesting, you know. So it's definitely the case that the plethora of publishing platforms now allows artists like yourself, like Joe Rogan, let's say, to circumvent the intermediaries in a way that has never before been possible.
Yeah, and so I guess the beauty too with Joe Rogan and with you and with others is that you conceptualized and created sort of your masterpiece and then decided to bring in something to help supplement that and reinforce it. And so that's so maybe that is something I could, you know, it's like you didn't approach the Daily Wire of like, hey, let's start a podcast. And then, like you already sort of created the format and they just respectfully added to it. And so maybe that's a good way to go about doing it even with mine. Yeah. Like,
well, one of the ways you can tell if you can do that. So in your situation, you're in a fortunate situation at the moment because at this moment, because you can say no. People are coming to you instead of you going to them, as you just pointed out. And so you have the fortunate opportunity to set the terms at the beginning and to think through what those are. And you already told me to some degree is like, you don't want to subordinate your music to profit. You don't want to become a generic act, and you don't want the corporate world interfering with your ability to speak directly to people. You know, those are principles that are actually worth writing down. You know, like if you, and I often recommend this to people in general, is imagine, and you could do this, it's a very useful thing to do. Imagine that you could be exactly where you wanted to be in 5 years. Like you've got these stellar opportunities in front of you. So then you got to allow yourself to imagine like you're a kid who's pretending or daydreaming and thinking, okay, man, I can be wherever I want in 5 years. I'm a musician. I've already got an audience. I've got an audience of people who want to hear me. I've got a lot of commercial options. And then I have a private life that I enjoy. Okay, how could I bring all of those together in the optimal way? What would that look like? And that's got to be, that's, you know, there's this line in the Gospels that says that you should ask and you'll receive, you should knock and the door will open, and you should seek and you'll find. And that's actually an injunction to a kind of meditative prayer. And the idea fundamentally, and this works like a charm, is what the hell do you want? Just imagine that fortune could conceivably smile on you in the way that it has in the last couple of weeks, and you could set up your future so that it was literally your dream. What would that look like? Like you obviously like performing. I mean, we could do that a little bit right now. If you imagine you could have a year where you had exactly the right balance between performing and having a private life. Like, what size audiences do you like playing for?
Small.
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge. I love the intimacy of a smaller. Bingo. I mean, we did the farm market. We had about 12,000, and even with that, despite everyone telling me I was a fool for doing it, I stayed and did like a meet and greet after for about 4.5 hours. But it gave me enough time that I was able to. I'd like it to stay at a level. I'd like to have opportunities to be able to meet people. So 10 or 12,000 people. I mean, we've got a few coming up that size. You know, you go back to your point about
10 or 12,000. I mean, it's small in the context of you could have an audience that's 50 or 60,000, but it's still not the smallest thing. And I would say 10 or 12,000. Maybe I'm putting words in his mouth, but even that size is fairly large for him as well. At this point, thrust into this position where it's expected that he's going to be playing for a lot of people. But when it comes down to it, I think if he really asked himself what he truly wants, he wants something that maximizes for intimacy rather than for quantity. Once again, we'll see how he deals with that personal struggle. Fame is a double-edged thing.
Trying to sort of paint a mental picture of 5 years ahead. I know you had talked about that at some point in a lecture, and that's actually, I give you some credit for me sitting in the chair I'm in now, because I have done that from your recommendation. I did your self-authoring program and all, maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
That's cool.
And, the thing that really spoke to me the most, though, was your story about your friend Chris, because I'm Chris. And,
oh yeah.
And I was
really. Oh man.
God
and I was.
Damn.
You talked about your friend Chris being an aspiring musician and getting high all the time, and if I recall correctly, Chris from what I could interpret, like with my own experience, maybe he was even experiencing some like cannabis-induced psychosis and all. I remember the story. I think it was Chris that was in the other room, and that
spoke to him.
Yeah, I realized like maybe I'm Chris,
Yeah. Religion's a funny thing. Just after Jordan had talked about all of this, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened. Something that seems so coincidental that it perhaps is no longer coincidental. I tried your self-authoring program, and there was a character in it that was suffering from similar problems that I could relate to, whose name was Chris, and I'm Chris. It gives me chills. Sometimes the past knocks at your future in ways that you don't understand at the time.
Well, there's part of the reason I wrote about my friend. He eventually committed suicide at about the age of 40. After he phoned me one night, he had got a bunch of his short stories published in a small book, in an anthology from Northern Alberta. And he's actually a pretty good short story writer. He was a good photographer too. He was quite a brilliant man, this friend of mine. And he did smoke too much pot, and it wasn't good for him. And maybe there was something else going on there too. But he became very bitter and resentful, and partly because he regarded his own ambition as evil. He was one of these demoralized young men, an early version of it, a sensitive person, and easily made guilty. And the constant harping about the evil patriarchy and the terrible consequence of male ambition just absolutely did him in. And it played into his own unwillingness to accept responsibility in a kind of pathological way. It was very sad. Like, I knew him for years, and he lived with me in Montreal when he was older, in his 30s, my wife and I, for a while, and we tried to help him get his life back on track, and did to some degree, but then he left and went back to Alberta. Anyways, he committed suicide the day after he had phoned me and told me about having this publication. He went out in a truck and hooked a tube to the exhaust and in his truck, and smoked cigarettes up in the mountains, and just let himself go. And it was quite the bloody catastrophe. But it was one of those situations where his life was too aimless, and he didn't take his own potential with enough seriousness. He regarded his ambition as evil. He kind of became a nihilistic Buddhist in the worst possible sense, and he drifted. It was really a real waste of talent. And so it's a hell of a thing to hear you say, that you saw some of him in you, but it's very, very common. And it is a lot better to develop a vision. You talked about this self-authoring program. You need a vision, man. And so now you said you talked to you sang to 12,000 people, and that was good, but you liked the personal contact with the meet and greet. So my team sets up meet and greets after my event at every event. And so that's a premium ticket. And, you can, what would you say, satirize that as excess capitalist exploitation. But you have to parse people in some manner when a lot of people want to see you. And it's also the case, that people want to enter into a reciprocal agreement. And so if they're really happy with you and what you're doing, they also want to contribute. And that's part of reasonable trade. Now, I love the meet and greets. I only meet people for about...
That money ends up getting redistributed back into the economy in some way, and it gets redistributed back into people's lives. This can be the beautiful exchange of capitalism. There's a lot more to this interview, and I'm probably going to break this up into multiple videos over the next little bit, because I really do want to provide the time necessary to fully go through this entire interview. But I also have something that I need to attend to at the moment, so I will be back in a couple of days to finish the rest of this. And so for the time being, take care and thanks for watching.